Our lesson of Scripture this morning can be found in 2 Kings. This morning I'll be reading from chapter 5, verses 1 through 8. Hear now the reading of God's holy word. Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Aram, was a great man and in high favor with his master, because by him the Lord had given victory to Aram. The man, though a mighty warrior, suffered from leprosy. Now the Arameans, on one of their raids, had taken a young girl captive from the land of Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "If only my lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." So Naaman went in and told his lord just what the girl from the land of Israel had said. And the king of Aram said, "Go then, and I will send along a letter to the king of Israel." He went, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of garments. He brought the letter to the king of Israel, which read, "When this letter reaches you, know that I have sent to you my servant Naaman, that you may cure him of his leprosy." When the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and said, "Am I God to give death or life, that this man sends word to me to cure a man of his leprosy? Just look and see how he is trying to pick a quarrel with me." But when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent a message to the king, "Why have you torn your clothes? Let him come to me, that he may learn that there is a prophet in Israel." This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
In this story from the book of 2 Kings, there are 4 characters. One is a 5-star general. The other is a big-time prophet. The other 2 are servants to the VIPs. There's a general in the army in Syria. His name was Naaman. He was the king of Syria's top general, a brilliant military strategist. He was successful on the battlefield, a great asset to his king. But he had leprosy, that terrible skin disease that disfigures the face, the hands, the legs, the arms. He was pretty awful to look at. And that took away the pleasure that he might have had from otherwise leading a normal life. And he longed to be healed so that he could lead a normal life. Now, Naaman's wife had acquired a new servant, a young Hebrew girl. And working around the house, she quickly figured out how things were. And she saw how Naaman was and knew how he longed to be healed and how much Naaman's wife wanted something to happen that would change their situation so that he could have that normal life. So one day, the girl is cleaning up a little bit, and it's really none of her business, and they might not appreciate it, but she works up her courage, and she says to her mistress, "There's a prophet over in Israel who could cure your husband of his leprosy." She calls her husband and says to the girl, tell Naaman what you told me. And the girl does. And Naaman is really excited. So he goes to the king of Syria and he asks for permission to go over to the land of Israel and find this prophet. And the king of Syria is pretty excited too, because Naaman is his #1 man in all the land, and there's nothing that the king would rather have than to have him made whole physically. So, off goes Naaman with a lot of gifts that the king of Israel wants to send, that the king of Syria wants to send to his brother king over in Israel, hoping to put him in a good mood to help Naaman, along with a letter that he has written on Naaman's behalf. Naaman travels with all these gifts, and he gets to Israel and presents himself to the king. And the king doesn't really know what to do, but he gets a message from Elisha, who has heard what's going on, and says, "Do not worry, Your Majesty, send him to me. I'll take care of it." And so the king sends Naaman off out in the country to go find Elisha. Now Elisha is the premier prophet in the land of Israel, but he doesn't care too much for life in Jerusalem. Too much politics, too much of the things that go on where money and power meet. And so he lives kind of out from town in a cave and has some eccentric habits, munches on things like wild berries and such. You think of John the Baptist and some of his eccentric habits, and you sort of settle those down a little bit, and you've got Elisha. When Naaman finds Elisha, he looks around, he finds him living kind of in a cave, a bowl full of wild berries that he's munching on, and he thinks to himself, "What is this? He looks a little crazy to me." But Naaman has come all this way. He's tried everything, and so he's not about to back out. Elisha says to Naaman, "If you want to be made well, go bathe yourself 7 times in the River Jordan, once a day." Now, what Naaman had really expected was to just sort of be healed. Kind of like they do on TV or at the tent revival that comes through every so often, where you go up and say what your problem is on stage, and they kind of pop you on the head real good and say heal. And it either happens or it doesn't happen. That's what Naaman is thinking is going to happen. But go down to the river. So Naaman gets mad, almost doesn't go, but he thinks better of it. And so he follows Elisha's advice. 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 6 times, starting to feel stupid. But he goes back for the 7th time, and when he comes up, it says his skin was as clear and smooth as a child's, which meant that Naaman looked 25 years younger than he actually was. He was whole again. He was normal. It was wonderful. Okay. Part 1. That's the end of it. Who's the hero? Is it Naaman? Well, not really. He just did what he was told. Is it the king of Israel? No, he may be the king of Israel, but he's just a minor player in this story. Well, how about Elisha? No, he was just doing what a prophet is supposed to do. The hero is the girl without a name who started the whole thing off by seeing an opportunity to do something good and doing it. Did she get a reward? We'd like to think so, but we don't know. All we know about her is that we don't know her name and that she did a good thing because doing a good thing was her natural inclination. Now, remembering that, let's see what happens. Part 2 of the story. In the background, while all this is going on, is a man who is servant to Elisha, a man named Gehazi, just as the girl is a servant to Naaman's wife. When Gehazi sees Elisha, refuse a sizable reward that's offered to him by Naaman. It just about kills him. He just can't bear the thought of Naaman going back to Syria with all that silver and gold weighing down that poor old donkey of his. Donkey will have to have back surgery if he carries all that loot back to Syria. Elisha is finished with Naaman, turns his back, and gets on with what he's doing. Gehazi slips out the back door down the road, and on his stubby little legs, he chases after Naaman as hard and fast as he can. And Naaman sees him coming and stops and recognizes him and says to him, "Did you forget something?" And Gehazi, being who he is, gets down in the dirt and bows and grovels a little bit. And says, "Master, Elisha remembered, while he does not need any money or any resources, there are two young prophets just getting started who live down the road, and they could use a little money. And he asked me to come after you and see if you would consider sending them a little." Well, Naaman is in the best mood of his life, and so he said, of course. And he gives Elisha the 2 talents of silver that we know that Naaman has brought with him. That 2 talents comes to 122 pounds of silver. I can imagine that bags filled with 122 pounds of silver would be quite imposing. He ties it on his horse, and he takes it and hides it and hurries back to Elisha as quick as he can so he won't be missed. Elisha, of course, who misses nothing, says, "Where have you been, Gehazi?" "Oh, nowhere, master, just out and about." Elisha says, "You're lying to me. You chased after Naaman, and you took money from Naaman that God turned down." Not good. Not good. You know what your punishment's going to be, Gehazi? "No, Elisha, I can't imagine." "Oh, I've got some real good punishment for you. In fact, it's perfect punishment for you in that the punishment fits the crime." And Gehazi thinks about what Elisha is telling him. And it suddenly occurs to him what punishment would fit the crime. And he looks at Elisha and he says, "You wouldn't do that to me, would you?" And Elisha says, "Watch me." He waves his arm, and Gehazi is covered with the leprosy that Naaman has just gotten rid of. And Elisha says to him, "Well, you go out and have a nice life." And Gehazi takes that 122 pounds of silver and disappears forever. End of story. What happened to him? We don't know. Did he enjoy his wealth? You've got to believe and have the feeling that somehow, with all that money, he didn't enjoy it the way he had planned on enjoying it. Looking at the whole story, what does it mean? It means that there are 2 ways of looking at things. One is to be out there in life and look at opportunities to live not just for yourself but for other people. The other way is in whatever situation you find yourself, to take care of number one. What a contrast between the young woman who works for Naaman's wife, who turns out to be the link between Naaman and his healing, and Elisha's servant Gehazi, who turns out to be looking out for number one in any and every circumstance of life. Why is one of them the way she is and the other one the way he is? The one of them is a generous person, thinking of others. The other one is conniving, self-serving. How does that happen? That happens by the choices we make. People make choices, we do, and that makes us the way we are. We don't get the way we are overnight. And we don't change the way we are overnight. Our lives are kind of like the great ships of the ocean. You don't take an ocean liner and just turn it on a dime. You need half the ocean to turn it around and head in a different direction. That's the way we are. The way we become pretty much sets direction we're going, and we need to be aware of how we are and who we're becoming, because that pretty much determines what's going on as we meet all the circumstances of life. We like to think that when life brings us to a special moment and there's something before us that's really important, that we can rise to the opportunity and meet what that occasion challenges us with. We can step up to the plate. Truth of the matter is, when that happens, what's going to happen is already been pretty much determined by who we are when we face that moment. We will follow our natural inclination, whatever our natural inclination in life has become. The young woman who worked for Naaman's wife, her natural inclinations were to do good. Gehazi, his natural inclination was to do for himself. The most important moments in life are not necessarily going to happen the way we want them to happen, because all of the lesser moments in life have been in the process of happening, and have pretty much set us up to be this way or this way. We become who we are one day at a time, one part of a day at a time. When we give our moments and our days and our weeks and our months and our years to God, we become one kind of a person. When we spend our months and our weeks and our years looking after ourselves and grabbing any personal advantage that comes along, we become another kind of person. And some special moment of life comes to us, and we think, well, we can treat it differently. Truth of the matter is, we are who we are in any and all of the circumstances of our life. And the big moments come, and who we are, that has determined what our natural inclination is to be this or this. That's what wins out. And that's what happens. A life well lived begins with the smallest details of every day, how we manage them, well or not so well, That's our part. When we manage the small details of our life as if each one is unique and special and means something, then we're establishing what our natural inclination is going to be when really important things come along. That's our part, to look after the little stuff so that when the big stuff comes along, we're there. And we don't spend a lot of time weighing this course of action or that course of action. We respond out of the heart that is already within us. A heart that is hardened and conflicted. Our heart that is warm and God-loving. When we respond out of that warm heart, out of that God-loving heart, out of that heart that feels for other people, then what comes back to us is God's gift in return, which is a life of service and consequence, a life that is fulfilling and satisfying. Not necessarily in the way the world looks at fulfilling and satisfying in terms of being able to take a sheet of paper and list concrete things that you have or you have accomplished, but in a sense of wherever we are, in whatever circumstances come to us in life, that we deal with them as men and women of faith. And by that, in the place we live, fraught with all of the things that come along with it that have to be handled, we're making a choice to be God's person in the time and in the place and in the circumstances where we are. And that is a blessing and a gift from God.